It takes 400 degrees Fahrenheit for dried linseed oil to blister, peel, and turn to ash. I know this because my father timed it while my mother threw 3 years of my life into the backyard fire pit. My name is Camila Lopez. I was 16 years old, standing on the patio of our house in Boise, Idaho, watching my parents burn every painting, sketch, and charcoal portrait I had ever made. They called it an intervention. They told me they were saving me from a life of poverty. I stood there, choking on the smell of burning canvas and turpentine, while my older sister Elena leaned against the sliding glass door, sipping a diet soda and hiding a smirk behind the rim of her can. I did not scream. I did not beg them to stop. I just watched my identity curl into smoke and promised myself that the next time a fire started in this family, I would be the one holding the match. What age were you when you realized your parents loved a version of you that did not exist? Drop your age in the comments right now. Welcome to Elena Vengeance, where we tell the stories of the quiet daughters who learned how to build empires in the dark. If you have ever been told your passion is worthless, hit that subscribe button. You are going to want to hear exactly how I made them pay for those ashes. The fire snapped and popped in the twilight. David, my father, stood by the pit with an iron poker pushing the edges of a stretched canvas deeper into the orange coals. Sylvia, my mother, held the heavy black portfolio case I had carried to school every day since freshman year. She unzipped it with the efficiency of someone sorting laundry. She pulled out a watercolor of a local canyon. It had taken me 70 hours to get the light right on the rocks. She did not even look at it before tossing it onto the embers. "This is for your own good, Camila," she said, dusting her hands on her jeans. "Art is not a career. It is a disease that ruins families. Look at your sister." I shifted my gaze to Elena. She was 19, taking accounting classes at the community college, and carrying the title of the Golden Child like a crown she had not earned. She raised her soda can in a silent toast to the flames. "You need to focus on real numbers," my father added, leaning his weight on the iron poker. "Stability, structure, not this emotional nonsense." My throat tightened, but I kept my breathing even. If I cried, it would only prove their point, that I was too emotional, too fragile for the real world. So I cataloged the loss. 15 oil canvases, 40 charcoal studies, 24 watercolors. Gone. When the last piece of paper dissolved into gray flakes, my parents walked back inside the house, satisfied they had cured me. Elena lingered for a moment. "You can always take up knitting," she whispered, as she walked past me into the kitchen. The patio door slid shut. The lock clicked. I stood alone in the dark backyard. The heat from the pit radiated against my shins. I waited until the house lights flicked off one by one upstairs. Then I walked over to the cooling fire pit. I knelt on the damp grass. Using my bare hands, I dug into the center of the pile where the heat still bit at my skin. I scooped up a handful of the fine gray powder. I pulled an empty glass vial from my jacket pocket, the one that used to hold my favorite cobalt blue pigment. I funneled the ashes inside, pressed the cork tight, and slipped it back into my pocket. They thought they had destroyed my future. They just handed me the foundation for my masterpiece. 3 years ticked by in a steady rhythm of rows, columns, and profit margins. I turned 19, and I did not rebel openly. I learned to speak their language instead. To fund my secret passion, I needed capital, and I needed a cover story that my family would respect. I secured a high-paying job at a downtown corporate firm, working as a financial data analyst. My days were spent in a sterile gray cubicle, staring at dual monitors, predicting market trends and optimizing expenditure reports. The work was cold and logical. It paid exceptionally well. Every direct deposit that hit my bank account was another brick in the fortress I was quietly building right under their noses. I rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of Boise. From the outside, it looked like the predictable choice of a young, practical professional trying to save money. Inside, it was a divided world. I placed a twin mattress on the floor of the smaller guest room and used that narrow space for sleeping and storing my conservative office clothes. The master bedroom, however, belonged to the paint. The master suite featured high ceilings and large windows facing north, providing the perfect indirect sunlight. I installed heavy-duty blackout curtains that pulled tight against the frames, ensuring not a single sliver of light or shadow could be seen from the street at night. I bought industrial ventilation fans to cycle the air, pulling the sharp odor of turpentine and linseed oil out through a carbon filter window unit. The room held custom wooden easels, expensive badger hair brushes, and rows of premium oil pigments. I maintained this double life with clinical precision. By day, I wore beige slacks and navigated corporate spreadsheets. By night, I stripped off the uniform, locked my front door, and stood before towering blank canvases, painting until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned from sleep deprivation. My parents demanded to inspect the apartment 2 weeks after I moved in. I knew Sylvia would hunt for any sign of weakness or artistic relapse. I prepared the bait with the same attention to detail I used in my data models. I ordered thick, glossy pamphlets for an advanced certified public accountant exam prep course. I scattered them strategically on the kitchen island, next to a yellow highlighter, a cup of black coffee, and a legal pad filled with complex tax codes I had copied from the internet. When David and Sylvia arrived, they walked through the front door with their usual critical posture. Sylvia ran her index finger over the baseboards, checking for dust, while David inspected the water pressure in the kitchen sink. Then he saw the pamphlets. He picked one up, and a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "Taking the real world seriously now, Camila," he said, tapping the glossy paper against the granite counter. "This is what we wanted for you. Focus. Structure." Sylvia nodded, looking at the legal pad. "We are very proud of this direction. It is much better than those childish hobbies you used to waste time on." I stood by the refrigerator and offered a tight, polite smile. I told them I was studying late every night to get ahead at the firm. When David asked why the master bedroom door was locked, I calmly explained that my firm required me to keep all sensitive client financial data behind a deadbolt when working from home. He respected the corporate jargon entirely. They drank their tea, praised my new, mature mindset, and walked out the door without ever realizing they were standing 10 feet away from a room filled with wet oil paintings. They swallowed the lie without chewing. The physical toll of my double life was exhausting, but the emotional toll of their conditional love required a different kind of endurance. That endurance was tested during our mandatory Sunday dinners. A month after the apartment inspection, I sat at the long oak dining table in my parents' house. The air smelled of roasted carrots, heavy beef gravy, and the familiar scent of unearned arrogance. My Uncle Richard had flown in from Portland for the weekend, and he sat across from me, holding a glass of red wine. Elena sat at the center of the table, radiating smug satisfaction. She had just been hired as a junior loan officer at a regional bank branch. David carved the pot roast and proudly directed the conversation toward Elena. "Richard, you should see her new office," he said, passing a plate of sliced beef down the table. "Elena is approving commercial loans now. She has real authority, a true professional career." Uncle Richard raised his glass to her. "That is fantastic, Elena. It takes real intelligence to handle the financial sector." Elena offered a practiced, humble smile, touching her collarbone. "It is a lot of responsibility," she said, "but I like knowing that my decisions impact the local economy. I get to tell people yes or no." Sylvia beamed, placing a hand over Elena's. "We always knew you would be the successful one, honey. You always had the drive." Uncle Richard turned his attention to me. He looked at my plain gray sweater and offered a pitying glance. "And what about you, Camila? Your dad tells me you are still doing data entry downtown." Before I could answer, David let out a short, dismissive laugh. "She has a little spreadsheet job, Richard. She looks at numbers on a screen all day. It pays her rent, but it is nothing compared to what Elena is doing. Elena is building a network. Camila just presses buttons in a cubicle." Elena cut a small piece of carrot and looked at me with fake sympathy. Data entry is important work, Dad. Someone has to do the tedious typing so the real executives can make decisions. I picked up my fork and sliced my portion of the pot roast. I did not defend myself. I did not correct their misunderstanding of my actual job title. I let the silence hang for a moment, chewing the dry meat. While they sat there insulting my intelligence, I retreated into the safe, quiet space of my own mind and ran the math. Earlier that morning, before coming to this dinner, I had logged into a secure online portal. I had listed a digital abstract piece, a study of smoke and shadows, on a boutique underground art exchange. An anonymous collector in Seattle had purchased the file outright. I calculated the exact figures in my head while my father poured more wine. $5,200, minus a platform hosting fee of 4%, minus the flat wire transfer charge. The net profit sitting in my hidden business checking account was $4,987. I looked at Elena. She worked 40 hours a week wearing uncomfortable heels and dealing with angry bank customers. I had made more money in a single 4-hour digital painting session than she made in her entire monthly salary as a junior loan officer. "Pass the salt, please," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. David pushed the salt shaker toward me, shaking his head. "Try to observe how your sister handles herself, Camila. You might learn something about ambition." I salted my food and took another bite. They thought they had successfully broken my spirit all those years ago in the backyard. They had no idea they had just driven my ambition underground where it could grow lethal. But as I sat there listening to the clinking silverware, I realized a new problem was forming. The digital sales were lucrative, but my true passion was the physical oil canvases locked in my apartment. Those pieces were becoming too large, too emotive, and too valuable to remain hidden in the dark. I needed to move them into the real world. I needed to enter the high-stakes physical gallery scene without my family ever tracing the success back to Boise. I realized right then that Camila Lopez could never sell a painting. I needed a ghost. I needed an alias so flawless that not even the sharpest critic could pierce the veil. To become a ghost in the modern American financial system, you must understand the architecture of corporate anonymity. I filed articles of organization for a limited liability company in the state of Delaware. A registered agent handled the public paperwork, shielding my name from any state registry. I paid the filing fees using a prepaid debit card purchased with cash from a local convenience store. The legal entity was christened CLM Holdings. The artist's pseudonym was C.L. Mercer. The identity possessed no gender, no age, and no geographic location. It was merely a burner email address, routed through a virtual private network and a post office box located 2 towns over. In the safety of my sealed master bedroom, I spent 3 weeks stretching a 60 by 40-inch canvas over a custom pine frame. I worked through the nights, layering thick strokes of charcoal gray, muted crimson, and stark titanium white. The piece was a visceral study of confinement and suppressed heat. I titled it Embers. I constructed a custom wooden shipping crate, lined the interior with dense foam padding, and shipped the heavy package via private freight to a prestigious contemporary art gallery located in the Pioneer Square district of Seattle. The gallery specialized in emerging Pacific Northwest talent and catered to high-net-worth tech investors. I did not expect an immediate response from them. The head curator was notoriously ruthless, known for rejecting 99% of unsolicited portfolio submissions. 13 days after the freight truck departed, my encrypted inbox pinged. A single unread message sat in the queue. The curator praised the raw, textural depth of the work. He offered to feature Embers in their upcoming autumn showcase, taking a standard 50% cut of the final sale. I typed a 1-sentence reply accepting the terms. A week after the showcase opened, a second email arrived. A private software executive purchased the painting on opening night. The retail price was $12,000. The gallery took their commission and wired the remaining balance of $6,000 directly into the corporate checking account of CLM Holdings. I stared at the bank statement illuminated on my dual monitors. The digits glowed against the dark screen. The ghost had a pulse. It had a bank account. It had power. The real world demanded my attendance that same evening. Sylvia mandated a family celebration at a high-end steakhouse downtown. The occasion was Elena purchasing a new vehicle. It was a silver mid-range crossover SUV. She had financed the car over 72 months at an inflated interest rate, resulting in a crushing monthly payment. To my parents, however, this entry-level purchase was treated like acquiring a private jet. They viewed it as the ultimate marker of adult success and financial literacy. I arrived at the restaurant wearing a sensible navy blazer and flat shoes, playing the role of the drab younger sister to perfection. The dining room smelled of seared butter, roasted garlic, and expensive bourbon. David and Sylvia were already seated in a semicircular leather booth flanked by Elena and her fiancé, Greg. Greg was an auditor who spoke almost exclusively in golf metaphors and wore ties that matched Elena's dresses. I slid into the empty chair next to him. David raised his gin martini the moment I sat down. To Elena, he announced, his voice carrying over the ambient noise of the restaurant, "A woman who knows how to navigate the real world and secure premium assets." We clinked our glasses together. My water goblet tapped lightly against Elena's crystal champagne flute. The dinner conversation revolved entirely around the leather seats, the fuel efficiency, and the extended factory warranty of the crossover. Elena detailed the arduous negotiation process at the dealership, framing herself as a master tactician. Sylvia nodded along, gripping her linen napkin like she was listening to a war hero recount a perilous battle. The waiter eventually cleared our empty plates and brought out a 3-tiered chocolate mousse cake. Sylvia had pre-ordered it days in advance. The thick white icing spelled out, "Congratulations, Elena," in looping cursive script. The waiter set the dessert in the center of the table and then placed the black leather check presenter directly in front of my mother. Sylvia did not even open the folder to look at the total bill. She simply slid the leather book across the white tablecloth until it hit the base of my water glass. "You can cover the dessert portion, Camila," she said. Her tone was casual, but it left no room for debate. "You have been working so many hours lately. Tell us, what exactly is keeping you chained to that cubicle until 9 every night?" I pulled my slim wallet from my purse, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. "I am restructuring high-yield asset allocations," I replied, keeping my voice measured and void of emotion. "It is a long, intricate process." Sylvia rolled her eyes and let out a sharp, dramatic sigh. "More boring math," she said, waving her hand dismissively at me. "That is your core problem, Camila. You hide behind spreadsheets instead of living. You lack drive. You need to take actual risks, like your sister. Go out and acquire something real." I unzipped the leather folder. The cake alone cost $85. I reached into my wallet and bypassed my personal debit card. I pulled out a heavy metal corporate credit card. The name embossed on the bottom edge read CLM Holdings. The card was tied directly to the business checking account that currently held the $6,000 deposit from the Seattle transaction. I placed the cold metal card on top of the printed receipt. "You are right, Mom," I said, offering a genuine, warm smile. "I really should focus on securing real value. I will try to be more ambitious in the future." Sylvia nodded firmly, pleased with my rapid compliance. The dinner concluded with tight hugs and another 15 minutes of praising the silver SUV under the yellow lights of the restaurant parking lot. I drove back to my apartment in silence, the streetlights rhythmically flashing across my windshield. I unlocked my deadbolt, hung my keys on the hook by the door, and walked straight into the studio. The rich scent of oil paint and mineral spirits greeted me like a familiar friend. I woke up my computer monitor to check my secure inbox before picking up a brush. There was a new message from the Seattle gallery director. The subject line read, "Urgent Client Commission Request." I opened the encrypted email. The buyer who purchased Embers was captivated by the technique. He wanted to commission a series of 3 large-scale pieces for the lobby of his new corporate headquarters. But there was a strict condition attached to the offer. The gallery director stated the buyer refused to wire the $50,000 advance payment until he had a live video consultation with the artist to discuss his architectural vision. The director demanded a Zoom meeting with C.L. Mercer by Friday afternoon. I sat back in my desk chair. The ventilation fan hummed steadily in the window frame. My pulse echoed loud in my ears. I was earning more in a single transaction than Elena took home in an entire year. But the walls of my carefully engineered double life were shrinking fast. C.L. Mercer was supposed to remain an untraceable ghost, a shadow on a canvas. Now, a tech billionaire wanted to look her directly in the eye. I resolved the tech executive's demand for a live consultation by manipulating the parameters of the visual frame. I positioned a high-definition webcam directly over my workstation, pointing the lens straight down at my glass palette. When the video call connected, the billionaire saw only my hands wearing black nitrile gloves, mixing cadmium red and raw umber with a steel palette knife. I spoke with a steady, calculated cadence, focusing entirely on the architectural dimensions of his corporate lobby. He found the eccentric anonymity fascinating. He agreed to the terms without further hesitation. The Austin commission was secured. The gravity of that triumph, however, was immediately suspended by the trivial demands of my family. 2 weeks before Elena's wedding, I was summoned to my parents' house. Elena was marrying Greg, a bland accountant whose personality was as rigid and colorless as a blank ledger. The house was in a state of frantic preparation. Floral arrangements covered the dining table. Caterers called the landline every 10 minutes. Sylvia paced the hardwood floors, issuing orders with the authority of a battlefield commander. Because they viewed my corporate job as menial data entry, I was assigned the task of formatting and printing the reception seating charts. Elena handed me her silver laptop and walked into the living room for a final dress fitting. I sat at the kitchen island, resting my hands on the keyboard. The air smelled of sharp hairspray and the sweet, cloying scent of vanilla frosting from a cake tasting box. I opened the spreadsheet application and adjusted the margins for the printer network. While dragging the cursor toward the print icon, my finger grazed the touchpad. A minimized web browser expanded, filling the screen. It was Elena's email inbox. I did not intend to pry. My eyes simply caught my own name in bold text at the top of the screen. The subject line read, "Managing Camila." The thread contained 4 messages exchanged between Sylvia David and Elena over the past 48 hours. I stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the house, the ticking wall clock, the muffled voices from the living room faded into static. I leaned closer to the screen. Sylvia initiated the thread. "We need a strategy for the photography session," she wrote. "Camila insists on wearing that drab navy dress. She refuses to put effort into her appearance. Keep her in the background. Her lack of style will ruin the aesthetic of the professional photos. We cannot afford the country club guests thinking our family has a lost cause dragging us down." Elena's response was typed just 20 minutes later. "Agreed, Mom. I told the photographer to focus on the core group. I will assign her to a corner table near the kitchen so she stays out of the main camera angles during the reception. Greg's partners are attending, and we need to project success." David chimed in last. "Just make sure she handles the administrative tasks today. It keeps her busy and out of our way." My hands did not shake. My eyes did not water. The cold, physiological reaction I experienced was far more dangerous than sadness. It was clarity. For years, I had justified their behavior as simple misunderstanding. I had told myself they were just misguided parents wanting the best for their children. But these words were physical evidence of calculated malice. They were not trying to protect me. They were actively managing my existence to protect their own fragile social status. I did not confront them. I pressed the necessary keyboard shortcuts to capture the screen. I logged into my encrypted CLM Holdings cloud drive and uploaded the high-resolution image. I created a new master directory on the server and dragged the file inside. I titled the folder For Later. Then I printed the seating charts, closed the laptop, and walked into the living room to hand Elena the papers with a calm, practiced smile. The wedding day arrived under a cloudless blue sky. The country club reception hall smelled of cut grass, expensive champagne, and roasted meats. I wore the drab navy dress they despised. I kept my hair pulled back in a severe clip. I played the role of the unremarkable sister with chilling obedience. Following the ceremony, the wedding party gathered on the manicured lawn for formal portraits. The photographer, a frantic man holding a heavy camera lens, directed the group to tighten their formation around the bride and groom. I stood on the far left edge of the group next to my Uncle Richard. Sylvia stepped forward. She smoothed Elena's veil and then walked over to me. She placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Her manicured nails dug into my collarbone. "Just step back a bit, Camila," she whispered, her smile fixed tight for the waiting camera. "This shot is just for the core group. We need to center the focus." She applied physical pressure, steering me out of the frame. I took one step back onto the grass, then another. I watched the flash fire illuminating the perfect, successful family. They looked radiant. I stood in the shadow of an oak tree, feeling nothing but the cool weight of my cellular phone resting in my dress pocket. When the reception began, I located my assigned seat. Elena had kept her promise. Table 14 was positioned at the extreme rear of the ballroom, bordering the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. The continuous noise of clattering dishes, shouting waiters, and rushing footsteps drowned out the elegant string quartet playing near the dance floor. I was seated with Greg's distant elderly relatives. A woman to my right spent the evening adjusting her hearing aids, while a man across the table chewed his ice cubes in rhythm with the music. The waiter eventually set a plate in front of me, containing a piece of dry, overcooked chicken and limp asparagus. I did not complain. I pulled my chair closer to the table, draped the long white linen napkin over my lap, and withdrew my phone. Under the cover of the tablecloth, I opened my secure email client. The tech executive from Austin had sent the final, legally binding contract for the 3-piece corporate commission. I scrolled through the dense legal jargon. The terms outlined a strict timeline for delivery. The total payout listed at the bottom of the document was $150,000. The gallery took their percentage, but my net profit would clear 6 figures. I looked across the ballroom. Sylvia was clinking crystal glasses with the local bank manager, laughing at a joke I could not hear. David was shaking hands with Greg's accounting partners, puffing his chest out in a display of manufactured wealth. Elena was dancing in the center spotlight, spinning in her expensive white gown. I typed my encrypted digital signature onto the glowing screen. I hit send. They banished me to the shadows, thinking it was an effective punishment. They believed isolation would force me to realize my own insignificance. They did not understand that shadows provide the perfect operational cover for a predator. The exile they imposed upon me at table 14 gave me the exact, undisturbed silence I needed to build my empire. I swallowed a bite of the dry chicken, took a sip of sparkling water, and locked my phone screen. The contract was signed. The money was secured. The ticking clock of my revenge had officially started. But as the waiter cleared my empty plate, a new logistical nightmare began to form in my mind. Fulfilling a 6-figure corporate contract meant painting and shipping towering canvases across the country. And the physical boundaries of my hidden life were about to be tested by the very people trying to keep me small. The reality of fulfilling a massive corporate commission is rooted entirely in logistics. Artistic talent means nothing if you cannot physically deliver the product. The tech headquarters in Austin demanded a centerpiece canvas measuring exactly 12 feet by 8 feet. This required stretching heavy raw linen across a custom, reinforced aluminum frame, working in sections to ensure the tension remained uniform. My master bedroom studio was technically large enough to house the structure, but maneuvering the finished piece out of the apartment would require mechanical precision. I spent 4 weeks working through the nights. I utilized industrial-grade oil pigments suspended in a fast-drying alkyd medium. The piece was a sharp, kinetic study of digital fragmentation, painted in aggressive strokes of cobalt blue and bone black. It was designed to anchor the entire architectural flow of the billionaire executive's lobby. When the final layer dried, I faced the ultimate operational challenge. A 12-foot canvas cannot be rolled without damaging the thick impasto texture. It had to be shipped flat, encased in a custom-built wooden crate lined with shock-absorbent polyethylene foam. I contracted a specialized fine art logistics firm. They required a heavy-duty flatbed truck and a 4-man handling crew to extract the crate from my ground floor apartment. I scheduled the pickup for a Tuesday at 2 p.m, a time when David was typically running errands on the other side of Boise, and Sylvia was attending her weekly country club luncheon. I took a personal day from my data analyst job, citing a phantom migraine. My plan was airtight. At 1:15 p.m, my doorbell rang. It was not the short professional buzz of a freight driver. It was 3 rapid, impatient presses. I checked the security monitor positioned near my desk. David stood on my concrete welcome mat. He wore his golf windbreaker and a scowl, tapping his foot against the pavement. The logistics truck was scheduled to arrive in exactly 45 minutes. The massive wooden crate sat directly behind my front door, blocking a significant portion of the hallway. If he stepped inside, he would immediately hit a wall of raw pine. I secured the deadbolt on the studio door. I grabbed my purse, opened the front door just wide enough to slip my body through, and pulled it shut behind me, ensuring the latch caught. The sharp afternoon sun hit my eyes. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "what are you doing here?" He did not offer a greeting. He simply crossed his arms over his chest. "Your sister took her SUV into the dealership for scheduled maintenance this morning. They promised her a loaner vehicle, but there was a mix-up with the reservation. She has a crucial meeting with a commercial real estate client at 3 o'clock. I need to borrow your car." I stood on the concrete mat, mentally calculating the timeline. My Honda sedan was parked directly in front of the apartment. If I handed him the keys, he would drive away, leaving the curb clear for the incoming freight truck. If I refused, he would likely push his way inside to argue, exposing the wooden crate and unraveling my entire operation. "I need my car later today," I replied, offering a mild protest to maintain my cover. "I have to run to the pharmacy." David let out a sharp, exasperated breath. His face hardened, taking on the familiar tone of moral superiority he used whenever he felt challenged by his lesser daughter. "Do you hear yourself, Camila? Elena is negotiating a $1 million commercial loan. Her career impacts the entire community. You type numbers into a spreadsheet, and you need to buy aspirin. Stop being so incredibly selfish and hand me the keys. She will return it tonight." I looked at his outstretched hand. He felt entirely justified, demanding my property to facilitate Elena's success. He believed my time, my assets, and my life were inherently subordinate to hers. I reached into my purse, unclipped the key fob from my wallet, and dropped it into his palm. "Thank you," I said, projecting an aura of defeated compliance. "Tell Elena good luck with the loan." He snorted, shoving the keys into his pocket. "Just try to learn something from her work ethic." He turned his back on me, unlocked my Honda, and drove away. I watched the red taillights disappear around the corner of the industrial park. Exactly 2 minutes later, a pristine white box truck with a hydraulic lift gate turned onto my street. The logistics crew parked in the exact space David had just vacated. They worked with silent efficiency. I directed them through the side patio entrance, avoiding the narrow front hallway entirely. We loaded the 12-foot crate onto the flatbed, securing it with heavy-duty ratchet straps. I signed the electronic manifest under the name CLM Holdings. The truck pulled away at 2:30 in the afternoon, carrying a piece of artwork that would soon clear 6 figures in pure profit. I walked back into my empty apartment, locked the door, and poured a glass of cold water. My hands were steady, but my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had dodged the collision by a margin of less than 120 seconds. The tension, however, did not dissipate. That evening, Elena drove my Honda back to the apartment. She did not come to the door. She simply parked it, left the keys under the mat, and sent a brief text message stating she had left it with a full tank of gas. I walked outside to retrieve the keys. As I sat in the driver's seat, I noticed a small discrepancy. I always reset my trip odometer when I filled the tank, tracking my mileage for tax purposes. When I handed the keys to David, the digital display read 12 miles. Now it read 14. Elena worked downtown just 3 miles away. The math did not align with a simple trip to a real estate meeting. I opened the center console to grab a pen and found a small yellow sticky note resting on top of my insurance registration. The handwriting belonged to my father. It contained a list of numbers. 34,210. 34,224. He was logging my total mileage. I stared at the yellow paper, the cold reality settling over me like a heavy winter coat. David was not just borrowing the car for Elena. He was actively auditing my movements. He was checking the odometer to verify my routine, searching for any deviation from the pathetic, isolated life he assumed I lived. He wanted to prove that I had no social engagements, no hidden ambitions, and no existence beyond the cubicle and this apartment. My family was actively monitoring my failures, while I, secretly, handled million-dollar logistics. The physical boundaries of my double life were shrinking with every passing week. The high-wire balancing act between what they thought I was and who I actually was required constant hypervigilance. They were hunting for weakness, but they were completely blind to the empire growing right under their feet. I crumpled the yellow sticky note and tossed it into the cup holder. Let them track the miles. Let them build their fragile case of superiority. The Austin Commission would be installed within days, and my bank accounts would swell again. But the success of C.L. Mercer was generating dangerous momentum. The underground whispers regarding my identity were beginning to echo in much larger arenas. I could control my father and his petty surveillance tactics, but I could not control the digital footprint of my own rising fame. And the digital firewall protecting my identity was about to be tested by a predator far more sophisticated than David Lopez. The Vanguard National Gallery in New York represents the apex of the American contemporary art market. It is an institution that dictates cultural value and financial worth with ruthless precision. Its head curator, Victoria Sterling, operated with the cold, calculating efficiency of a hedge fund manager. She did not discover talent. She engineered monopolies. A single endorsement from Victoria could turn an unknown painter into an industry titan overnight. A rejection could exile a veteran artist to permanent obscurity. When unauthorized photographs of my 12-foot Austin commission leaked onto a private architectural forum, Victoria took notice. She recognized the unique kinetic technique, the raw alkyd strokes, and the visceral manipulation of space. She immediately instructed her elite acquisitions team to locate C.L. Mercer. They hit the Delaware corporate wall. Most gallery directors would stop there, sending a formal inquiry to the registered agent and waiting for a polite reply. Victoria was not a standard director. She viewed anonymity as a personal challenge. To pierce a corporate shield, you only need to follow the money. I learned the details of her hunt later through the digital breadcrumbs left on my secure server. Victoria hired an independent forensic accountant. This investigator pulled public tax filings, cross-referenced the freight manifest from the Texas delivery, and initiated a deep trace on the routing numbers used by the Seattle Exchange to deposit my initial payment. My operational security was highly sophisticated, but the federal banking system mandates strict geographic compliance for institutional wire transfers. The digital trail slipped through a series of encrypted nodes before hitting a solid concrete wall. The routing number belonged to a boutique credit union located in the Pacific Northwest. Specifically, it pointed to a commercial branch in Boise, Idaho. Victoria now possessed a geographic coordinate. The ghost had a zip code. While a New York Titan mapped my financial coordinates, I was required to attend a late summer barbecue at my parents' house. David stood on the poured concrete patio flipping fixed steaks on a stainless steel grill. The air was thick with the smell of lighter fluid, charred meat, and cut grass. Sylvia buzzed around the folding tables, arranging potato salad and organizing plastic cutlery with frantic urgency. Elena and Greg sat under a wide canvas umbrella, discussing their mutual stock portfolio with the Hendersons, our wealthy next-door neighbors. I arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a plain black cotton shirt and dark denim jeans, planning to fade into the background and run out the clock on my mandatory attendance. Sylvia intercepted me near the wooden side gate. She held a thick, bundled piece of fabric in her hands. It was an oversized beige cardigan knit from cheap, scratchy synthetic yarn. A bright red clearance sticker dangled from the collar, indicating it had been purchased from a discount bin. "Put this on, Camila," she instructed, pushing the heavy garment into my chest. "The temperature is dropping and you look washed out in that black shirt." I looked up at the sky. The late afternoon sun was bright and the temperature hovered near 70 degrees. "I am perfectly warm, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Sylvia stepped closer, narrowing her eyes. She raised her voice, ensuring the Hendersons and Elena could hear the exchange over the sizzle of the grill. "Do not argue with me today. You need help dressing yourself. You have zero sense of presentation, and I will not have you looking like a vagrant while we are entertaining guests." Mrs. Henderson glanced over her plastic cup of iced tea. Sylvia offered the older woman an exasperated sigh and a tight smile. "We try to guide her," Sylvia added, her voice dripping with artificial maternal concern. "It is an uphill battle." I did not protest further. Fighting her would only draw more attention, and I required invisibility. I pulled the hideous beige sweater over my head. The sleeves hung past my knuckles, dragging awkwardly against my hands. The hem reached my mid-thigh. It was a suffocating, itchy drape. I walked over to the grill, taking the plastic tongs from my father to manage the roasting corn. I stood there, enveloped in ugly fabric. The oversized sweater functioned as a physical manifestation of their perception. It hid my shape, my posture, and my identity. I wore it with silent endurance, calculating that every public insult they hurled at my outward appearance only added another layer of armor to the empire I was building underneath. My cellular phone rested in the front pocket of my jeans, pressed tight against my thigh. As David droned on to Greg about his golf handicap, the device began to vibrate. It was not a single notification. It was a sustained, rhythmic pulsing. I shifted my weight, pretending to inspect the vegetables, while subtly pressing my wrist against the fabric to monitor the cadence. My customized digital alerts were triggering in rapid succession. High-end cultural blogs and art critics from Manhattan to London were publishing speculative articles about C.L. Mercer. The Austin Commission had gone viral within exclusive circles. Industry insiders were offering private bounties for any verifiable information regarding the elusive painter. The digital noise was deafening. My pocket shook with the weight of global recognition, while my father ordered me to fetch more charcoal from the garage. I handed the plastic tongs back to David and walked away from the patio. The air inside the dim, detached garage was thick with dust and motor oil. I pulled my phone from my pocket to silence the frantic notifications. The screen glowed brightly in the shadows. Among the sea of blog alerts and forum mentions sat one encrypted email. It did not originate from the standard web portal I used for my Seattle gallery inquiries. It bypassed the CLM Holdings contact form entirely, piercing straight through to my primary secure address. The sender domain belonged to the Vanguard National Gallery Executive Suite. I opened the message. There were no formal greetings. There was no professional posturing or polite introductory remarks. The body of the email contained a single line of text, written with terrifying precision. "I know you are in Idaho, and I am coming to see the canvases." I stared at the glowing letters. The forensic accountant had successfully breached the firewall. Victoria Sterling was no longer a distant name printed in an art magazine. She was an incoming threat descending upon my carefully guarded territory. I locked my screen and placed the device back into my pocket. I reached down and picked up the heavy paper bag of charcoal briquettes. The rough paper scratched against the oversized sleeves of the beige sweater. My parents thought they could control my world by wrapping me in clearance rack fabric and treating me like a servant. They had no idea that an apex predator from New York was already booking a flight to tear the fabric apart. I walked back out into the sunlight carrying the charcoal, preparing for the collision between my reality and my family. Victoria Sterling did not travel. She deployed herself. When her black luxury sedan pulled away from the Boise airport, she did not head straight to my apartment. She directed her driver to a premium coffee house in the downtown financial district to review my dossier and map her approach. The coffee shop sat directly across the street from the regional bank branch where my sister worked. Sylvia was sitting at a corner table near the front window, waiting for Elena to join her for a midday lunch date. Sylvia possessed a radar for unearned wealth. She spent her entire life studying the markers of status so she could mimic them. Victoria wore a tailored charcoal wool coat and carried a structured leather briefcase that cost more than my parents' mortgage. She moved with an aura of unapologetic authority. Sylvia saw a target. She assumed Victoria was an out-of-town real estate developer scouting the area for commercial expansion. Sylvia picked up her latte, walked over to Victoria's table, and introduced herself. I heard the exact details of this encounter later from Victoria herself, sitting in my studio. Sylvia projected her artificial country club charm, leaning in close to deliver her unsolicited pitch. "Welcome to Idaho," Sylvia said, offering a polished, predatory smile. "I could not help but notice you analyzing those financial documents. If you are looking to secure commercial capital in this region, my daughter Elena is the premier loan officer at the bank across the street. She handles the most exclusive portfolios in the city. You really should speak with her before finalizing any local investments. She is a rising star." Victoria did not look up from her digital tablet. She took a slow sip of her espresso. She let the silence stretch, forcing Sylvia to stand there while the ambient noise of grinding coffee beans and idle chatter filled the void. Sylvia shifted her weight awkwardly, her smile tightening at the corners. "I do not require a loan," Victoria finally replied, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "I am looking for a specific residential address. It is an industrial unit on the outskirts of the city." Victoria read my street number and unit letter aloud, keeping her eyes fixed on her screen. Sylvia blinked, her polished facade cracked. "That is my younger daughter's apartment," she blurted out, the confusion evident in her tone. "She just types data into a computer for a logistics firm. You must have the wrong address entirely. There is nothing of value out there. It is a very modest place." Victoria finally looked up, meeting my mother's gaze with cold calculation. The Manhattan art world operated on secrets and obscured truths, but Victoria recognized a fragile ego instantly. "We will see," Victoria said. She closed her briefcase, stood up, and walked out the glass doors, leaving Sylvia standing alone, clutching her paper cup in humiliated silence. 40 minutes later, a sharp, heavy knock echoed through my apartment. I unlocked the deadbolt. Victoria stood on my concrete mat. She did not introduce herself. She stepped past me into the narrow hallway, her eyes scanning the predictable beige sofa and the cheap particle board television stand in my living room. "Show me the work," she commanded, taking off her coat. I walked her past the sterile living space and stopped at the heavy, solid core door of the master bedroom. I turned the brass key and pushed the door open. The studio smelled of sharp mineral spirits and rich linseed oil. The blackout curtains were pulled tight against the window frames, but the overhead daylight-balanced bulbs illuminated the room with clinical clarity. 8 large canvases leaned against the drywall. They were visceral studies of heat and confinement painted in deep, bruised purples, scorched earth tones, and stark titanium white. My workstation sat meticulously organized in the center, holding rows of premium brushes and sealed glass jars of medium. Victoria walked into the space. She did not offer lavish praise. She moved from canvas to canvas, evaluating the brushwork, the structural tension, and the underlying architecture of each piece. She stopped in front of a striking composition depicting a crumbling geometric structure consumed by dark, rolling smoke. She traced her finger inches away from the wet texture, analyzing the heavy impasto application. "You paint like someone who's been suffocating for a decade," she observed, her back still turned to me. "The technique is flawless. You understand light perfectly, but the anger is what makes this valuable. The restraint, followed by the explosion." She turned around and opened her leather briefcase. She pulled out a thick, stapled contract and laid it flat on my paint-stained work table. "Vanguard National Gallery," she stated, stepping back to give me a clear view of the document. "Our Winter Gala is the premier cultural event in Manhattan. I want you to headline the exhibition. We will transport the entire collection using climate-controlled freight. We require exclusivity for 3 years, and we require your physical presence at the opening." C.L. Mercer steps out of the shadows. I look down at the dense legal text. The advance payment printed on the second page represented a tier of financial independence that would permanently sever my need for a corporate cover story. It was enough capital to buy a penthouse outright. Before I could reach for a pen, my cellular phone shattered the quiet room. The device rested on the edge of the work table. The caller identification displayed Sylvia's name. I looked at Victoria. She offered a slight nod, granting silent permission to interrupt the high-stakes negotiation. I tapped the green icon and activated the external speaker. Camila, my mother's voice, barked through the small audio driver, sharp and demanding. "Where are you right now?" "I am at my apartment, Mom," I answered, keeping my tone flat and controlled. "Good," Sylvia snapped. Elena just purchased a crib and a heavy wooden changing table for the nursery. Greg is too busy with his accounting firm to put it together, and Elena cannot lift the boxes. "Get in your car and drive over to her house. You need to assemble the furniture." I stared at the Vanguard contract. "I am working right now, Mom. I have obligations today." Sylvia let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "You type numbers, Camila. You can do that any time. Do not act like your time is more valuable than your sister's pregnancy. She is building a real family. Get over there and make yourself useful for once." Victoria stood perfectly still, watching the phone with narrowed eyes. The high society curator was witnessing the exact origin point of the anger she had just praised on the canvas. Sylvia continued her tirade, oblivious to her audience. "And some strange woman in a nice coat was asking about your apartment down at the coffee shop today. Have you been failing to pay your bills? Is it a collection agency? I swear, Camila, if you drag our family name into financial trouble because of your pathetic little data entry job, I will never forgive you. Get to Elena's house immediately." I met Victoria's gaze. A silent understanding passed between us. The curator now possessed the final piece of the puzzle. She understood why I engineered a ghost. She heard the poison in my mother's voice and recognized the fuel that powered my brushstrokes. "I will not be assembling the furniture, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying calm, "and my finances are perfectly secure." I pressed the red icon terminating the connection before Sylvia could launch another insult. The room fell silent again, save for the steady, low hum of the window ventilation fan. I picked up a silver pen from my desk. I leaned over the contract. "A collection agency," Victoria mused, securing her tailored coat. "Your mother has a remarkable talent for misdiagnosing value." "She only sees what she wants to see," I replied. I pressed the pen tip to the signature line. I did not sign my legal name. I signed C.L. Mercer, executing the binding agreement. I slid the paperwork across the table. Victoria secured the document inside her briefcase. "We begin transport logistics on Monday," she said. "Prepare yourself, Camila. When this collection debuts, your anonymity will evaporate. The media will dissect your background. The industry will want to know who you are." "I know," I answered, walking her back toward the front door. The deadbolt clicked shut behind her. I stood alone in the narrow hallway of my modest apartment. The dual existence I had engineered over the past 3 years was officially reaching its expiration date. My family still viewed me as a pathetic subordinate, a disposable tool they could summon to build cheap nursery furniture. They thought they owned my time and my dignity. They were wrong. The collision between my hidden empire and their manufactured delusion was no longer a distant possibility. It was a scheduled event. I walked back into the studio and looked at the heavy canvases. I was not going to hide from the impact. I was going to calculate the exact trajectory, design the stage, and invite them to watch their golden hierarchy shatter into a million pieces. The next phase required a centerpiece so deeply personal it would leave them breathless. The preparations for the Vanguard Winter Gala required a level of logistical coordination I had never experienced. Victoria Sterling operated a synchronized machine of public relations executives, lighting designers, and risk management actuaries. They needed a focal point for the marketing materials. Every premier gallery exhibition requires an anchor piece to draw the critics and hold the room. Victoria reviewed my portfolio and selected a sprawling, unfinished oil painting leaning against the far wall of my studio. The composition featured a dark, jagged vortex consuming a geometric framework. It was a study of destruction and rebirth. I titled it The Firepit. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk. I reached past the spare sketch pads and extracted the small glass vial. The cork stopper was stiff from years of untouched storage. Inside rested the fine gray powder I had salvaged from the backyard embers on my 16th birthday. My parents thought they had incinerated my future that night. They believed turning my portfolio into carbon would force me into a rigid, predictable life of corporate servitude. I carried the glass vial to my central workstation. I set out a large, tempered glass palette. Using a steel palette knife, I scooped a thick, heavy mound of ivory black oil pigment onto the glass. I added a few drops of cold-pressed linseed oil to increase the viscosity. Then I pulled the cork from the vial. The smell of the old ash was faint, but it carried the distinct memory of charred paper and melted charcoal. I tipped the glass opening over the dark paint. The gray dust tumbled out, coating the wet pigment. I pressed the flat edge of the steel knife down, folding the ash into the oil. The texture changed immediately. The smooth, buttery consistency of the paint transformed into a heavy, gritty paste. The trauma literally became the medium. I stood before the towering canvas and applied the mixture. The ash-infused black paint dragged across the raw linen, creating deep, haunting ridges that caught the studio lights. The grit added a three-dimensional structural integrity to the dark vortex of the composition. I spent 12 hours finishing the piece. I did not stop to eat. I did not check my phone. I channeled every insult, every stolen holiday, every patronizing comment my family had ever issued directly into the friction of the brush. When I finally stepped back, the painting felt alive. It held a dark, undeniable gravity. 2 days later, the Vanguard Risk Management Department required a standardized appraisal to secure a transit insurance policy. I submitted high-resolution digital scans of the finished canvas, highlighting the unique textural elements. The return email arrived from a senior underwriter in Manhattan. Based on current market trajectories and the unprecedented demand generated by Victoria Sterling, they established the insured value of the Firepit at $450,000. I stared at the specific string of numbers on my monitor. My father had burned my artwork because he claimed it held zero financial value. I had just turned the remnants of his arrogance into an asset worth nearly $500,000. The sharp buzz of my apartment intercom shattered my concentration. I threw a drop cloth over the wet canvas, locked the studio door, and walked into the living room. I checked the security screen. Elena stood on the front steps, holding a thick manila folder and an expensive leather handbag. She wore a tailored beige trench coat and tapped her polished heels against the concrete, impatient and expectant. I opened the front door. She bypassed any formal greeting and pushed past me into the narrow hallway. "My wireless printer is jammed," she announced, tossing the manila folder onto my cheap kitchen counter. "I have a critical dinner tonight at the country club with Greg's senior accounting partners. I need these tax addendums printed immediately. Load the files from my cloud drive." I did not argue. I played the role of the obedient administrative assistant, booting up my laptop and connecting to the network printer. The machine began churning out the dense legal documents. While I collated the warm pages, Elena wandered down the hallway. She did not approach the locked studio door. Instead, she pushed open the door to my designated sleeping quarters, the small room where I kept my twin mattress and my modest wardrobe. I finished stapling the documents and followed her down the hall. Elena stood in front of my small wooden dresser. In her hands, she held a faded blue velvet box. It was a family heirloom left to me by our paternal grandmother. Inside rested a single strand of vintage saltwater pearls, secured by an ornate silver clasp. Elena had always resented the fact that our grandmother willed the jewelry to me. She viewed it as an administrative error, believing the eldest daughter deserved the premium assets. She unclasped the necklace and draped the pearls around her neck. She turned toward the cheap mirror on the wall, adjusting the collar of her trench coat. "These work perfectly with my dress," she said, her tone casual, but laced with unyielding entitlement. "I am borrowing them for the dinner tonight." I stood in the doorway. "Those belong to me, Elena," I stated, keeping my voice even. She turned around, offering a patronizing smile. "Do not be selfish, Camila. Greg's partners are evaluating him for a senior equity stake. We need to project generational wealth and stability. You sit in a cubicle all day and eat takeout in this tiny apartment. You never go anywhere important enough to wear vintage pearls. They're just gathering dust in that box. It is a waste of a good asset." I looked at my older sister. She stood in my cheap hallway radiating artificial superiority, convinced that a country club dinner represented the pinnacle of high society. She justified her theft through the lens of her own perceived importance. I ran the specific mathematics in my head. I knew the exact appraisal value of the heirloom. The saltwater pearls were worth $800 on the current estate market. Behind the deadbolt, just 10 feet away from where Elena stood, sat a canvas insured for $450,000. She thought she was asserting dominance by claiming a trinket. She had no concept of the true financial gravity surrounding her. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand the necklace back. "You are right," I replied, my expression flattening into a mask of quiet surrender. "They suit your aesthetic much better. Keep them for the evening." Elena smiled, securing her handbag. "I always appreciate when you finally see reason, Camila." She picked up the stapled tax documents from the kitchen counter and walked out the front door, the stolen pearls gleaming against her neck. Let her have the pebbles. I owned the mountain. The following week, the specialized, climate-controlled freight team arrived to extract the collection. I supervised the crating process, ensuring the fire pit was secured within dense foam padding. Watching the white truck drive away toward the interstate, I felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere of my life. The walls of my hidden world were dismantling themselves. The shadows were receding. The Vanguard Winter Gala was scheduled for the second Friday in November. I booked a first-class ticket to New York. The tension tightened around my chest as the calendar pages turned. I was no longer hiding. I was actively stepping onto the grandest stage the art world could provide. But a public triumph in Manhattan would hold no true satisfaction if my family remained ignorant in Idaho. The trap required the victims to be present. I needed David, Sylvia, and Elena standing in that gallery when the velvet drape fell. I could not simply mail them an invitation. They would scoff at an art show, dismiss my involvement, and refuse to spend the airfare. I had to engineer a scenario that weaponized their greed, their social climbing, and their obsession with corporate prestige. I needed to build a phantom bridge that would carry their fragile egos directly into the epicenter of my empire, without triggering a single alarm. To capture a predator, you do not chase them. You leave a trail of bait so enticing, they walk into the steel jaws of their own free will. To manipulate a social climber, you must speak the language of exclusivity. I contacted the corporate attorney representing CLM Holdings in Delaware. I instructed him to draft highly specific legal documents disguised as luxury promotional materials. My day job, the sterile financial data firm I used as a cover, was a subsidiary of a larger national conglomerate. I utilized that corporate hierarchy to construct a phantom sweepstakes. My legal team generated an official-looking portfolio bearing the crisp letterhead of my employer's parent company. The documentation stated that due to outstanding metrics in the regional commercial banking sector, a select local professional had been chosen for an all-expenses-paid VIP cultural immersion package in Manhattan. The centerpiece of this package was priority access to the Vanguard National Gallery Winter Gala. The bait had to be irresistible. The package included 3 round-trip first-class airline tickets, a 3-night reservation in a luxury penthouse suite at a 5-star hotel located directly across from the gallery, and a private town car service. It was a flawless mirage of corporate prestige, engineered to flatter Elena's inflated sense of self-worth. I authorized the transfer of $22,000 from my hidden business account to cover the entire cost of the trap. The courier delivered the thick black envelopes to my parents' doorstep on a crisp Tuesday morning. I did not have to wait long for the reaction. My cellular phone vibrated on my desk at the data firm shortly after my lunch hour. The caller identification displayed my mother's number. I stepped into an empty glass conference room overlooking the city blocks and accepted the connection. "Camila, you will never guess what just arrived by certified courier," Sylvia announced, her voice vibrating with a frequency of pure, manic triumph. I kept my tone dull and compliant. "What happened, Mom?" "Elena has been recognized by the national conglomerate that owns your little data company." Sylvia explained, the smug satisfaction radiating through the audio driver. They selected her for an elite corporate rewards program based on her exceptional commercial loan closure rates at the bank. "They are flying us to New York City, first class. We have a penthouse suite and VIP passes to a highly exclusive art gala." This is what happens when you build a real career, Camila. Important people notice your value. I stood in the empty conference room, looking down at the traffic below. The sheer density of the dramatic irony was almost tangible. Sylvia believed my sister had earned a luxury vacation through banking competence. She had no idea the entire production was funded by the daughter she viewed as a clerical failure. The parent company of my firm had zero knowledge of this sweepstakes. The airline tickets, the premium suite, the black car were all purchased with the profits generated by the very art portfolio David had tried to incinerate 10 years ago. "That sounds incredible, Mom," I replied, injecting a careful dose of wistful longing into my voice. "Since the package is technically connected to the company I work for, is there any chance I could join you? I have never been to New York." The rejection was immediate and sharp. "Oh, Camila, no, Sylvia," scoffed, the pity in her voice thin and transparent. "The package only includes 3 specific tickets: David, Elena, and myself. Besides, this is a premier networking event for the financial elite. You would not fit in with that class of people. You lack the formal wardrobe and the conversational skills to navigate a room full of high-level executives. You would just feel out of place and uncomfortable. It is better for everyone if you stay in Boise and look after the house." "I understand," I said, letting my shoulders drop to physically manifest the sound of defeat. "I hope you have a wonderful time. I need to go." Sylvia continued, her attention already pivoting back to her own vanity. "I have an appointment at the boutique downtown. I need to purchase a new evening gown. You cannot wear off-the-rack fashion when you are walking a red carpet in Manhattan. I will send you pictures." The line disconnected. I slid the phone back into my pocket. My mother was rushing out to spend her own money on a dress to impress a room full of critics who were gathering solely to analyze my canvas. She was buying armor for a battlefield she did not realize she was already standing on. With the logistics of the trap secured, I turned my attention to my own preparations. I did not purchase an evening gown. Gowns imply you are attending the event to be seen by others. I required clothing that communicated unyielding authority. I contacted a private tailor in Seattle. Over the course of 3 remote visual fittings, I commissioned a bespoke suit cut from midnight blue Italian wool. The jacket featured sharp, structured shoulders and a tapered waist. The trousers broke perfectly over a pair of handcrafted leather Oxfords. It was an outfit devoid of excess fabric or decorative frills. It was the exact antithesis of the ugly beige clearance sweater Sylvia had forced upon me at the summer barbecue. This suit was not designed to blend in. It was designed to command the space. I spent my final evening in Boise, standing inside my empty studio. The heavy scent of linseed oil and mineral spirits lingered in the air, but the canvases were gone. The space felt hollow. I packed my luggage with clinical detachment. I folded the midnight blue jacket, slipping it into a protective garment bag. I polished the leather Oxfords until they gleamed. Every physical action was a deliberate step toward the unraveling of a decade-long lie. My family spent the week broadcasting their upcoming trip across their social circles. Elena posted photographs of the thick, black VIP envelopes on her social media feeds, attributing the reward to her relentless work ethic. David bragged to his golf partners about his daughter's corporate influence. They were inflating their own balloon to maximum capacity, blind to the needle I held in my hand. Thursday morning arrived crisp and cold. The Vanguard Winter Gala was scheduled for Friday night. My flight departed Boise 3 hours before my parents' scheduled departure. I drove to the airport alone, parked my Honda in the long-term structure, and bypassed the crowded economy security lines. I handed my ticket to the gate agent. The boarding pass read, "First Class." I walked down the jet bridge and took my seat in the spacious leather cabin. As the aircraft banked east over the snow-capped mountains of Idaho, I ordered a glass of sparkling water. I rested my head against the cool window. The board was set. The pieces were moving across the country at 30,000 feet. My family was flying toward a trap lined with velvet and champagne. The execution was imminent, and the staging ground for their ultimate reckoning awaited us in the center of Manhattan. But before the velvet drape fell, I needed to monitor their arrival, ensuring their arrogance reached its peak before the sudden, devastating drop. New York City operates on a frequency of pure, relentless ambition. When the wheels of my flight touched down, the sterile quiet of my life in Boise vanished, instantly replaced by the kinetic energy of Manhattan. I did not travel to the hotel in a standard yellow taxi. A private black car, arranged by Victoria Sterling, waited for me at the arrivals curb. I watched the dense, towering architecture of the city rise around the highway, feeling the subtle shift in power dynamics. This was no longer hostile territory. This was my staging ground. My first destination was not my hotel. I directed the driver straight to the Vanguard National Gallery. I needed to inspect the battlefield. The gallery space was a massive cavern of polished white walls and gleaming marble floors located in the heart of Chelsea. The chaos of preparation was in full swing. Men on heavy steel scaffolding adjusted high-powered exhibition lights, while catering crews pushed carts of crystal glassware through the swinging side doors. I stood near the main entrance, blending into the shadows, wearing dark jeans and a plain gray sweater. Victoria spotted me immediately. She moved through the frantic room with sharp, precise steps, ignoring the frantic questions from her staging directors. She led me to the center of the main exhibition hall. The auxiliary canvases, the smaller kinetic studies, and structural abstracts from my Boise studio were arranged along the perimeter walls. They looked entirely different under the calibrated gallery optics. The colors were violent and commanding, but my focus remained locked on the center of the room. A temporary, freestanding structural wall had been erected specifically to anchor the centerpiece. The Firepit hung there. The 12-foot canvas commanded the entire spatial flow of the gallery. A team of 3 lighting technicians worked on tall ladders, meticulously adjusting the angles of the focused spotlights to highlight the deep, abrasive ridges of the ash-infused black paint. It looked like a living, breathing entity, a dark star pulling the light into its center. Once the illumination was perfectly calibrated, Victoria signaled the staging crew. 2 men carried a heavy track-mounted rod across the top of the structural wall. A thick, dark crimson velvet drape fell over the canvas, completely obscuring the dark vortex and the name plaque mounted beside it. The mechanical hiss of the velvet sliding into place sounded like a steel door locking shut. The trap was armed. I left the gallery through the private rear exit and walked across the crowded avenue to my accommodations. The hotel was a historic 5-star property towering over the Chelsea district. I bypassed the main registration desk entirely. A concierge escorted me to a private elevator reserved exclusively for the top-floor residents. I was not staying in a standard guest room. Victoria had secured the owner's penthouse. The suite featured dark hardwood floors, imported leather furniture, and a massive wraparound terrace offering an unobstructed view of the Manhattan skyline. I unzipped my garment bag, hanging the midnight blue bespoke suit in the cedar-lined closet. I walked out onto the cold stone terrace, leaning against the heavy iron railing. Directly across the street, 3 floors down, I could see the glowing glass facade of the Vanguard Gallery. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The digital connection to my family remained active. Elena had created a group text message chain, including Sylvia David and myself, ensuring I remained a captive audience to their manufactured triumph. The incoming message contained a photograph of the living area inside their luxury suite, located 8 floors directly below my penthouse. The image highlighted a velvet sofa and a complimentary fruit basket resting on a glass coffee table. "Can you believe this view?" Camila Elena typed the text dripping with performative pity. "We are right in the center of the city. The conglomerate really knows how to treat their top performers. It is a shame you could not come, but this level of service would probably just overwhelm you." Another message chimed a moment later. This one was from Sylvia. "The suite is beautiful, but the concierge sent up the wrong brand of champagne. They provided a domestic vintage instead of the imported French label we requested. It is a minor inconvenience, but when you reach a certain tier of corporate success, you expect precision. I suppose you would not understand the difference sitting in your tiny Boise apartment." I stared at the glowing screen. The biting cold wind whipped across the terrace, rustling my gray sweater. I did not feel a sudden surge of anger. I felt the cold, satisfying weight of absolute control. They were complaining about a free bottle of champagne sitting in a suite that cost $3,000 a night. They believed their complaints validated their status as high society elites. They had zero concept of the fiscal reality supporting their luxury. The credit card holding the security deposit for their room, the card paying for the imported French champagne Sylvia was currently demanding from the front desk, rested securely in my slim leather wallet. The sister they left behind in Idaho, the sister they routinely mocked for lacking drive, was single-handedly funding their entire delusion. I typed a brief, compliant response. "That looks amazing, Elena. Have a great time at the gala tomorrow night. I will just be catching up on spreadsheets here." I pressed send, locked the screen, and set the phone down on the small outdoor table. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and took a slow sip. The ice clinked against the crystal. The dramatic irony was so dense it almost possessed a physical texture. They were building their pedestals higher and higher, completely ignorant of the fact that I held the sledgehammer waiting at the base. The sun dipped below the jagged horizon of the city, casting long, deep shadows across the avenue. The glowing Vanguard sign across the street flickered to life. The countdown clock was ticking. I was no longer the scared 16-year-old girl standing on a damp patio, watching her identity turn to smoke in a backyard fire pit. I was the architect of their reckoning. I had mapped the trajectory, engineered the funding, and built the stage. They were blindly walking into the epicenter of my empire, armed with nothing but unearned arrogance and a stolen pearl necklace. I finished my water and stepped back inside the warm, quiet penthouse, sliding the heavy glass door shut. Tomorrow night, the velvet drape would fall, the ghost of C.L. Mercer would evaporate, and Camila Lopez would step into the harsh, unforgiving light of the international art scene. I needed to rest. Executing a flawless demolition required a steady hand and a cold heart, and the opening act was less than 24 hours away. Friday evening arrived with the sharp, electric chill characteristic of late autumn in Manhattan. The Vanguard National Gallery Winter Gala was not merely an exhibition opening. It was a synchronized display of extreme wealth and cultural dominance. The avenue outside the gallery was barricaded by private security personnel managing a fleet of idling black town cars. Flashing strobes from credentialed press photographers illuminated the wet asphalt, creating a chaotic staccato rhythm of blinding white light. I did not enter through the front doors. I utilized the subterranean service corridor, bypassing the media circus entirely. My bespoke midnight blue suit fit with architectural precision. The structured shoulders and tapered waist operated like modern armor. I wore no jewelry. My dark hair was pulled back into a severe, polished knot. I rode the private freight elevator up to the second-floor VIP mezzanine, a glass-enclosed observation deck reserved for elite collectors and gallery executives. From this elevated vantage point, I possessed a sweeping, unobstructed view of the main exhibition hall below. The floor was a sea of tailored tuxedos and designer evening gowns. Waiters wearing crisp white gloves navigated the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and miniature caviar tartlets. A low, resonant hum of synchronized conversation echoed off the marble walls, masking the underlying tension of high-stakes financial networking. The room held hedge fund managers, prominent tech billionaires, and the most feared art critics on the eastern seaboard. At exactly 7:45, my secure earpiece vibrated with a short double tone. The head of gallery security spoke through the encrypted channel. "Target package has breached the perimeter," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "Moving through the primary entrance now." I stepped closer to the glass railing, resting my hands on the cool steel barrier. I scanned the chaotic cluster of arriving guests near the heavy glass doors. They walked in. Sylvia, David, and Elena moved through the grand entryway, displaying a staggering level of manufactured superiority. My mother wore an aggressively sequined emerald gown that caught the gallery lighting in harsh, chaotic bursts. The dress was too tight, too loud, and deeply out of sync with the refined minimalist aesthetic of the Manhattan elite. David walked a half step behind her, wearing a rented tuxedo that bunched awkwardly around his shoulders. He carried his chin unnaturally high, surveying the room like a feudal lord inspecting his newly conquered territory. Elena anchored the group. She wore a sleek black evening dress, heavily accessorized. The vintage saltwater pearls she had stolen from my apartment rested prominently against her collarbone. She held her chin high, attempting to project the aura of a high-powered banking executive. She failed. They all failed. They looked exactly like what they were: tourists playing dress-up, clinging to a counterfeit corporate invitation. I watched their behavior as they approached the mandatory coat check station. A young gallery assistant wearing a modest black uniform reached out to take Sylvia's faux fur wrap. David stepped forward, blocking the assistant. "We are special VIP guests of the corporate sponsor." David announced, his voice carrying a sudden, harsh volume that caused two nearby art critics to turn and stare. "We require premium service for our garments. Do not just throw them on a standard rack. Hang them in the executive suite." The young assistant blinked her professional smile, faltering for a fraction of a second. She recovered smoothly, offering a tight nod. "Certainly, sir. I will handle them with care." David snapped his fingers, a sharp, abrasive sound echoing over the ambient noise. "See that you do. My daughter is a senior executive, and we expect the accommodations to match her tier." He dismissed the assistant with a wave of his hand and turned back to his wife. They merged into the dense crowd, holding their empty hands out, expectant and entitled. They flagged down a passing waiter, lifting 3 full champagne flutes from the silver tray, without offering a word of thanks. I stood on the mezzanine, tracking their movements. The excruciating tension of the impending collision began to compress the air in my lungs. They were navigating a room filled with people whose net worth exceeded the gross domestic product of small nations, and my family believed they were the most important individuals present. They were strutting through a kingdom funded entirely by my brushstrokes, completely ignorant of the trap closing around them. They posed near a minor abstract piece near the entrance. Elena tilted her head, gesturing for David to take a photograph with his cellular phone. She adjusted the stolen pearl necklace, ensuring it caught the light. She smiled a hollow, practiced expression, designed purely for social media validation. She was capturing evidence of her triumph, preparing to broadcast her elite status back to the neighborhood book clubs and the bank tellers in Boise. My earpiece buzzed again. "Victoria is in position near the center stage," the security chief reported. 5 minutes to the main unveiling sequence. The target package is drifting toward the primary exhibition wall. I stepped away from the glass railing. The observation phase was concluded. The time for silent surveillance had expired. I took a slow, deliberate breath, pulling the cold, conditioned air deep into my chest. I counted the seconds, the steady internal rhythm grounding my racing pulse. 1, 2, 3. The math was flawless. The logistics were secure. The emotional detachment was absolute. I turned and walked toward the hidden spiral staircase that connected the VIP mezzanine directly to the rear of the center stage. The heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the narrow, dimly lit corridor. The muffled roar of the crowd below filtered through the drywall. If you have ever spent a decade swallowing insults, allowing the people who broke you to believe they won simply because you refused to fight on their terms, you understand the exact frequency of my heartbeat in that stairwell. It was not a chaotic, frantic rhythm of panic or fear. It was the heavy, relentless pulse of a predator moving in for the kill. I reached the bottom landing. A heavy black curtain separated me from the brightly lit stage. The temporary structural wall holding the fire pit stood directly in front of me, the crimson velvet drape hiding the masterpiece. Through a small gap in the fabric, I could see the faces of the crowd pressing closer to the stage, anticipating the introduction of C.L. Mercer. I adjusted the cuffs of my midnight blue jacket. I checked the knot of my hair, ensuring not a single strand was out of place. I stood in the shadows waiting for my cue. The dark architect of a demolition 10 years in the making. The ghost was dead, the artist was ready. A sharp spike of feedback echoed through the primary audio system. The low hum of the crowd vanished, instantly replaced by a sudden electric silence. The show was starting. But before the drape dropped, a specific targeted interaction needed to occur. Victoria Sterling had a script to execute, and my mother was about to deliver the perfect punchline. The execution of a public trap requires perfect timing and flawless misdirection. The heavy black curtain hiding my position behind the center stage provided a clear acoustic channel. I could hear the distinct shuffle of expensive leather shoes against the marble floor as the crowd condensed, forming a tight perimeter around the draped canvas. Through the narrow gap in the fabric, I located my family. They had maneuvered themselves into the second row, pushing past a senior art critic from a major national publication. David stood with his arms crossed, adopting a posture of aggressive boredom. Elena sipped her champagne, scanning the crowd for anyone wearing a name tag indicating corporate importance. Sylvia, however, was vibrating with the frantic need to be recognized. Victoria Sterling appeared from the left flank of the gallery. She cut through the dense crowd like an icebreaker navigating a frozen sea. She wore a severe, tailored white suit that stood in stark contrast to the sea of dark evening wear. She held a microphone in her right hand, but she did not immediately ascend the stage. She paused. Her gaze swept the front rows, calculating, evaluating, and finally locking onto the aggressively sequined emerald gown worn by my mother. Victoria understood the psychological profile of a narcissist. She knew Sylvia would interpret any high-level interaction as validation of her own manufactured importance. Victoria altered her trajectory, stepping directly into the path of the Lopez family. "Good evening," Victoria said, her voice smooth and carefully modulated, projecting an aura of polite curiosity. "I am Victoria Sterling, the head curator of the Vanguard Gallery. I do not believe we have formally met. Are you visiting from out of town?" Sylvia's eyes widened. She recognized the name immediately from the promotional material stacked in the hotel lobby. She straightened her posture, pulling her shoulders back to project the image of a seasoned socialite. "It is an honor to meet you, Miss Sterling," Sylvia replied, her tone dripping with artificial charm. "We flew in from Boise, Idaho. We are here representing a major financial conglomerate. My daughter, Elena," she gestured proudly toward the woman wearing my stolen pearls, "is a highly successful commercial loan officer. The firm sent us as VIP delegates." Victoria offered a slow, microscopic nod. Her eyes drifted over Elena's stolen necklace, assessing its value in a fraction of a second, before returning to Sylvia. "How fascinating," Victoria murmured. "And what are your initial impressions of the exhibition? The contemporary market can be quite polarizing for those primarily focused on corporate finance." Sylvia took the bait instantly. She believed Victoria was testing her cultural literacy. She assumed the correct answer was to demonstrate a ruthless, pragmatic intellect, the kind of intellect that mocked vulnerability and prized rigid structure. "To be perfectly honest," Ms. Sterling, Sylvia began lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper, leaning closer to the curator. "I find most modern art to be incredibly self-indulgent. It is all amateur emotion masking a lack of real discipline. People throw paint on a canvas and call it a career because they are too lazy to get a real job." David nodded in agreement, shifting his weight. "It is a fragile industry," he added, crossing his arms tighter. "No real stability." Victoria did not blink. She maintained her polite, inquisitive expression. "You seem to hold very strong convictions regarding the value of artistic expression," she noted, her tone entirely neutral. Sylvia let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Experience breeds conviction, Ms. Sterling. In fact, I had to deal with that exact delusion within my own family. My younger daughter, Camila, went through a phase where she was obsessed with drawing and painting. She was wasting her life carrying around a portfolio of worthless emotional scribbles. She thought she was going to be an artist." Elena took a slow sip of her champagne, shaking her head in mock sympathy. It was pathetic, really. She had zero drive. Victoria tilted her head slightly, the white fabric of her suit catching the harsh gallery spotlights. "And how did you manage this situation, Sylvia?" Sylvia beamed, relishing the opportunity to broadcast her supreme maternal pragmatism to a powerful Manhattan executive. "I cured her of it," Sylvia stated, her voice swelling with dark, unearned pride. "I took every single canvas, every sketch, every charcoal drawing she had ever made, and I threw them into a fire pit in our backyard. I burned them all while she watched. It was an intervention. I had to destroy the fantasy to save her from a life of poverty. It was the most loving thing a mother could do." I stood behind the black curtain, my hands resting in the pockets of my bespoke suit. My breathing remained slow and even. The ambient noise of the gallery seemed to drop away, leaving only the sharp, distinct echoes of my mother's confession hanging in the air. She had just weaponized my deepest trauma, attempting to use it as social currency to impress a woman she barely knew. She was bragging about the destruction of my identity. Victoria Sterling stared at Sylvia. The polite, inquisitive mask vanished. Victoria's expression hardened into a look of pure, clinical disgust. Her eyes swept over David, the silent enforcer, and Elena, the smug accomplice, before locking back onto Sylvia. The silence stretched tight, pulling the tension in the immediate vicinity to a breaking point. Several surrounding guests, including the senior art critic, had stopped their conversations to listen, their expressions morphing from polite interest to quiet horror. Sylvia's artificial smile began to falter at the edges. She sensed the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure, but lacked the self-awareness to understand the cause. "How absolutely fascinating," Victoria finally said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all trace of warmth. "It is rare to meet the architect of such profound inspiration. Your intervention appears to have yielded spectacular results." Sylvia relaxed, exhaling a quiet breath of relief. She believed she had successfully navigated the interaction. She thought she had established herself as a ruthless intellectual equal to the head curator of the Vanguard Gallery. "Thank you, Ms. Sterling," Sylvia replied, touching her sequined collar. "We pride ourselves on pushing our children toward real success." Victoria did not offer a closing pleasantry. She simply turned her back on my family, completely dismissing their existence. She walked up the 3 shallow steps ascending the center stage. Sylvia turned to David and Elena, whispering fiercely, her face flushed with victory. "Did you see that? I just made a major connection with the head of the gallery. This is exactly why we belong here." She had no idea she had just confessed to her own crime in front of the judge, the jury, and the executioner. She thought she had secured her place in high society. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her confession was the final nail in the coffin I had built for her. Victoria walked to the center of the stage, standing directly in front of the massive crimson velvet drape. She raised the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced, her voice echoing through the massive, cavernous hall, cutting through the remaining chatter with absolute authority. "May I have your attention, please?" The room went dead silent. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased. The shutter bursts from the press photographers paused. A sea of faces turned toward the stage, the collective anticipation generating a physical heat in the room. "We gather tonight to witness the unveiling of a collection that has already disrupted the foundation of the contemporary market." Victoria continued, pacing slowly across the polished wooden floorboards. "For the past year, the industry has chased a ghost, a pseudonym, an artist who bypassed the traditional gatekeepers, rejecting public validation in favor of brutal, uncompromising authenticity. The work you see surrounding you explores the architecture of confinement, the violence of suppressed identity, and the undeniable power of reconstruction." Victoria paused, letting the words settle over the silent crowd. Her gaze swept the front row, locking briefly onto Sylvia. "But the centerpiece of this exhibition, the painting hidden behind this velvet drape, is a testament to survival," Victoria stated, her tone carrying a sudden, dangerous edge. "It is a physical manifestation of a fire that was intended to destroy, but instead forged something unbreakable. It is my profound honor to finally introduce the artist who refused to burn." Victoria lowered the microphone and took a deliberate step backward. She raised her left hand, signaling the staging technicians hidden in the upper rigging. I stepped closer to the gap in the black curtain. My pulse finally broke its steady rhythm, accelerating into a rapid, violent sprint. The trap was sprung, the confession was logged, the ghost was dead. It was time to show them the ashes. Victoria lowered her hand. The subtle gesture transmitted a silent cue to the staging technicians hidden in the steel rigging overhead. A sharp mechanical click echoed from the ceiling. The track released its grip. The heavy crimson velvet drape did not flutter or drift. It plummeted. It fell like a guillotine blade, cascading downward and pooling into a thick, dark river at the base of the temporary structural wall. The gallery spotlights hit the 12-foot canvas with searing, unforgiving precision. The exhibition hall collective held its breath. The Firepit lived. The ivory black oil pigment, infused with the grit of my 16th birthday ashes, absorbed the harsh halogen beams. The deep textured ridges formed a sweeping dark vortex that seemed to physically pull the ambient oxygen out of the room. The piece was stark. It possessed a heavy, undeniable gravity. The critics in the front rows leaned forward, captivated by the raw structural tension and the kinetic brushwork. They saw a masterwork of contemporary expression. They saw a brilliant subversion of geometric form. I saw the burned remnants of a watercolor canyon and 40 charcoal sketches resurrected into a weapon. A secondary focused spotlight ignited snapping attention to a brushed stainless steel plaque mounted to the pristine white drywall directly right of the canvas. The typography was laser-etched and filled with dark enamel. The primary line read, C. L. Mercer, in a sharp, modernist font. Below that title, resting inside simple, curved parentheses, sat the true revelation, Camila Lopez. I pushed the heavy black curtain aside. I stepped out of the shadows and walked into the blinding glare of the gallery lights. I did not move with the hesitant, shuffling gait of the drab younger sister they had conditioned me to be. I walked with the calibrated stride of a chief executive taking ownership of a boardroom. The bespoke midnight blue Italian wool moved fluidly, framing my posture in sharp, uncompromising lines. The leather Oxfords struck the polished stage floorboards with a steady, rhythmic cadence. The heat of the theatrical bulbs pressed against my skin. The air smelled of expensive perfume ozone from the lighting rigs, and the faint metallic tang of static electricity. I bypassed the wooden podium and stood directly beside the towering canvas. I turned to face the sea of elite faces. The press photographers recognized the shift instantly. The phantom had materialized. A staggering barrage of camera flashes erupted, bathing the room in a strobe effect of blinding white light. The rapid electronic clicks of high-speed shutters sounded like a swarm of locusts echoing off the marble walls. I cut my gaze through the blinding glare. I scanned the front row. I located the aggressively sequined emerald gown. The physical reaction of my family played out in a kinetic sequence of pure, unadulterated shock. Elena stood frozen. Her fingers went slack. The expensive crystal flute slipped from her grip. Gravity took hold of the glass. It dropped 3 feet and struck the polished marble floor. The sharp crystalline shatter pierced the brief silence of the room, an incredibly distinct sound that echoed before the applause could begin. Shards of glass exploded outward. Pale yellow champagne splashed across the hem of her black evening dress and speckled the polished leather of her expensive shoes. She did not look down at the mess spreading across her feet. Her eyes were locked onto my face. Her jaw trembled. The vintage saltwater pearls rested against her collarbone, an $800 trinket now hopelessly dwarfed by a $450,000 reality. She had stolen the necklace to project wealth. Now she stood paralyzed in the shadow of an empire she could not afford to step inside. David stood next to her, his rigid posture dissolving in real time. The arrogant feudal lord evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified middle manager. The manufactured pride drained from his expression, replaced by a pale, sickly gray pallor. His shoulders slumped forward. He looked at the towering ash-infused canvas and then back up to the stage. I watched his eyes dart back and forth as he rapidly calculated the financial gravity of the room. He was realizing that his petty control tactics, his demands for my car keys, the meticulous odometer tracking, were deployed against an entity he could not even begin to comprehend. The daughter he ordered to assemble cheap nursery furniture was commanding a room full of billionaires. But the true epicenter of the destruction centered on Sylvia. She stared upward, her features locked in a grotesque mask of cognitive dissonance. Her mouth opened, forming a silent, breathless gasp. Her hands hovered near her chest, frozen mid-gesture, her manicured fingers curled inward. Just minutes prior, she had stood in this exact spot, bragging to Victoria Sterling about incinerating my portfolio. She had proudly claimed the title of my pragmatic savior. Now her brain was misfiring, desperately trying to reconcile the pathetic data analyst she had engineered in her mind with the titan standing under the gallery spotlights. Her eyes darted from the customized name plaque to my bespoke suit, and finally to the dark canvas containing the literal ashes of her cruelty. The shockwave traveling through the front row went entirely unnoticed by the rest of the gallery. The senior art critic, who had been shoved aside earlier, began clapping. The sound multiplied rapidly, rolling backward through the dense crowd until the cavernous hall shook with deafening applause. Tech executives, hedge fund managers, and cultural tastemakers cheered for the ghost who had finally stepped into the light. The noise was a physical force vibrating in my chest. I did not smile. I did not wave. I did not offer a humble bow to appease the audience. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting loose at my sides. I locked my gaze directly onto Sylvia's eyes. I held the visual connection, utilizing the high ground of the stage to force her to look up at me. I let her feel the crushing weight of the applause. Every single clap from the Manhattan elite served as a physical strike against the fragile architecture of her ego. The golden hierarchy she had meticulously built over 26 years broke apart under the halogen lights. The illusion of Elena's supreme success shattered, far louder than the champagne flute lying in pieces on the floor. I allowed the applause to wash over the stage for a full 60 seconds. I watched the realization solidify in my mother's eyes. She knew. She understood in that terrifying, unbroken silence between us that she was standing inside a trap paid for by my bank account. The pieces clicked together behind her wide, terrified eyes. She realized the corporate sweepstakes, the luxury penthouse, the imported champagne, the town car service, were all components of an elaborate guillotine, and the blade had just dropped, severing her delusions from reality. The performance portion of the evening was concluded. The art had spoken, and the industry had responded with overwhelming validation. The audience required an unmasking, but my family required a localized reckoning. I broke the eye contact with Sylvia. I stepped away from the towering canvas, preparing to descend the wooden stairs of the stage. It was time to walk into the front row, hand them the final receipt, and watch the remnants of their authority burn. The applause began to taper off, transitioning into a low hum of intense speculative conversation. The press photographers lowered their heavy cameras, checking digital viewfinders, and murmuring into headsets. I moved toward the shallow wooden stairs descending from the center stage. My stride remained steady and measured. The crowd directly in front of the stage recognized my trajectory. The elite attendees, holding their champagne flutes and their critical notebooks, instinctively parted. They created a narrow, clear corridor through the dense mass of people. It was an involuntary reaction, yielding space to the focal point of the room. I walked down the center of this temporary aisle, my leather Oxfords echoing slightly over the residual noise. I did not look at the billionaires or the hedge fund executives. I walked directly toward the small cluster of 3 tourists standing frozen near the shattered glass on the marble floor. The security perimeter established by the Vanguard team held the press back, allowing me a localized pocket of privacy within the public arena. When I stopped, I was standing less than 2 feet away from Sylvia. The harsh gallery lighting cast sharp shadows across her face, highlighting the thick layers of foundation and the frantic, desperate energy trapped in her eyes. The silence between us possessed an actual physical weight. It compressed the air. Sylvia's survival instinct, a lifelong habit of denying reality when it proved inconvenient, triggered a clumsy defensive maneuver. She attempted to reconstruct the maternal bond she had spent 10 years systematically destroying. She reached her hand out, her fingers trembling slightly, reaching toward the lapel of my tailored jacket. She forced a wet, strained smile onto her face. "Camila," Sylvia whispered, her voice thin and ragged, scraping against the quiet air. "Camila, what is all of this? Why did you not tell us? We are your family. We flew all the way here to—" I did not flinch. I did not swat her hand away. I simply stared at her extended fingers until she lost the nerve to make contact and let her arm drop back to her side. "Do not use that word," I said, my voice low, cold, and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. The acoustic dampening of the gallery isolated the sound, carrying the words sharp and clear. David cleared his throat, a dry, scraping sound. He attempted to step forward to regain the patriarchal authority he utilized to track my odometer miles and dictate my schedule. "Now listen here, Camila." He started his chest, puffing out slightly. "Your mother is asking you a direct question. You need to explain this situation. You have been lying to us." I turned my focus to David, locking onto his terrified eyes. I reached into the interior breast pocket of my midnight blue jacket. I did not retrieve a prepared speech or a legal document. I extracted my cellular phone. The screen illuminated instantly. I unlocked the device, tapping the screen twice to open the secure, encrypted folder labeled "For Later." I found the specific image file. I held the phone up, ensuring the glowing screen was visible to Sylvia, David, and Elena. The bright display showcased the exact screenshot of the email thread I had captured off Elena's laptop months ago. I did not summarize the content. I read their own words back to them, utilizing the precise, clipped cadence I employed when presenting fiscal data. Subject line: Managing Camila. I read aloud, holding their gaze. "Keep her in the background. Her lack of style will ruin the aesthetic of the professional photos. We cannot afford the guests thinking our family has a lost cause dragging us down." Elena's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. She looked down at the floor, her shoulders curling inward. The vintage pearls suddenly seemed incredibly heavy around her neck. I scrolled down to the next message. I told the photographer to focus on the core group. I continued reciting Elena's exact text. "I will assign her to a corner table near the kitchen so she stays out of the main camera angles. We need to project success." I lowered the phone and looked directly at Sylvia. "You placed me at a table near the catering kitchen to hide my existence. You cropped me out of the photographs to preserve a counterfeit aesthetic. You banished me to the shadows because you believed I was a failure who would tarnish your pristine reputation." Sylvia opened her mouth to protest, but the air caught in her throat. She looked left and right, checking to see if the surrounding VIP guests were listening. The senior art critic, standing a few feet away, observed the interaction with cold, analytical interest. The social climbing facade was entirely stripped away, leaving Sylvia exposed and raw in front of the exact high society audience she worshipped. "You misunderstood the dynamics, Sylvia." I continued, keeping my voice clinical and flat. "You thought you were punishing me with exile. You thought isolation would force me to realize my insignificance. You were wrong. You gave me the exact operational silence I required to build an empire. While you were bragging about a silver mid-range SUV and a junior loan officer title, I was negotiating six-figure international contracts on my phone under the table. While you were demanding I assemble cheap nursery furniture, Victoria Sterling was sitting in my living room offering me the Vanguard Winter Gala." David swallowed hard. His Adam apple bobbed. "Camila, this is just a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice lacking all authority. "We wanted you to be stable. We wanted to protect you from failing." I shifted my stance. "You did not want to protect me," I stated. "You wanted to manage me. You wanted a subordinate failure to stand next to Elena so she could look taller by comparison. You required a baseline of mediocrity to validate your own unearned arrogance." I reached into the right pocket of my trousers. My fingers brushed against smooth glass. I pulled out the small empty vial. The cork stopper was gone. The interior glass walls were coated in a fine, stubborn dusting of gray residue, the only remaining physical evidence of my 16th birthday. I held the vial up under the harsh gallery lights. Sylvia recognized the shape of the small container. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and hollow. She remembered the dark backyard, the smell of turpentine, and the iron poker pushing my canvases deeper into the orange coals. I took one step closer to David. He instinctively recoiled, a subtle shift backward, but I reached out and grabbed his right hand. His skin was cold and clammy. His fingers trembled violently. I turned his palm upward and placed the empty glass vial directly into the center of his hand. I folded his stiff fingers closed around the glass. "You were right, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a final, devastating register. It was an intervention. It just was not an intervention for me. I gestured toward the massive 12-foot canvas towering over the center stage. The dark vortex of the fire pit seemed to pull the light deeper into its textured ridges. "The ashes are on the canvas," I said. "You tried to burn my future to the ground. I took the carbon, mixed it into the paint, and sold it for $450,000. The entire delusion you built, the corporate sweepstakes, the luxury penthouse, the first-class tickets, it was all a trap, and I paid for every single piece of it using the ashes you generated." I stepped back, releasing his trembling hand. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice or offer them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I delivered the absolute truth with the cold, calculated precision of a financial audit. I watched the realization crush them. The invisible hierarchy they had worshipped for decades imploded, leaving them stranded in the wreckage. Elena stared at the spilled champagne, unable to formulate a response. David stared at the empty glass vial in his hand, breathing in shallow, ragged bursts. Sylvia stood completely paralyzed, tears ruining her heavy makeup, a social climber staring into an abyss she could not cross. I turned my back on them. I walked away from the shattered glass and the counterfeit elites. I moved back through the parted crowd, the sea of elite attendees closing ranks behind me, effectively cutting my family off from my trajectory. The flashbulbs triggered again as I approached Victoria Sterling, who stood near the far exit holding 2 fresh glasses of sparkling water. She offered a tight, approving smile. The unmasking was complete. The localized reckoning was delivered. But the final logistical detail remained. I had engineered their arrival, but their departure required a parting gift, a consequence grounded in the brutal reality of the financial mechanics they so desperately claimed to master. The execution was finished, but the bill was about to come due. I accepted the glass of sparkling water from Victoria Sterling. We did not exchange congratulatory platitudes. The success of the evening was self-evident, written in the hushed, reverent tones of the critics lingering near the stage. I took one sip, set the crystal flute on a passing waiter's silver tray, and walked toward the primary exit. The heavy glass doors slid open, yielding to the crisp autumn air. The chaotic energy of the avenue washed over me. I buttoned my tailored jacket against the chill, stepping onto the pavement. My family remained trapped inside the exhibition hall, surrounded by an elite tier of society they could no longer pretend to belong to. I did not look back. I crossed the street navigating the dense flow of late-night traffic and entered the grand lobby of the 5-star hotel. The space smelled of fresh lilies and polished brass. I bypassed the private elevator bank leading up to my penthouse and approached the primary concierge desk. A senior guest relations manager wearing a pristine charcoal uniform offered a polite, deferential nod. He recognized my face from the VIP registry. I placed my leather wallet on the mahogany counter, extracting my dark corporate credit card. "I need to amend the billing authorization for the Lopez party residing on the 8th floor," I stated, keeping my voice low and transactional. Effective immediately, the corporate account is detached from their reservation. All accumulated charges, including the nightly suite rate, room service incidentals, and the imported vintage beverages requested by the primary occupant, must revert directly to the guests upon their checkout tomorrow morning. The manager typed the parameters into his terminal. His eyes flickered, absorbing the updated ledger. The total outstanding balance hovered near $15,000. He looked up, maintaining his neutral professional composure. "The corporate card has been removed from the profile, Ms. Lopez," he confirmed. "The occupants will be required to present a personal payment method to clear the balance before departure." I thanked him, returned the card to my wallet, and walked toward the elevator. The architectural beauty of this specific consequence rested in its inescapable math. I knew the exact dimensions of my sister's financial reality. Elena carried an inflated car note for her silver crossover and utilized high-interest credit lines to fund her country club lifestyle. David and Sylvia operated on a fixed pension, supplemented by a dangerous habit of living beyond their means. Confronted with a sudden, inescapable $15,000 liability in the center of Manhattan, their manufactured superiority would collapse. They would be forced to drain savings accounts, beg for emergency limit extensions, and confront the stark reality of their own insolvency. The junior loan officer, who prided herself on fiscal brilliance, was about to face actual ruin, handed a bill she earned through her own unearned vanity. I checked out of the penthouse at dawn, before the sun crested over the skyscrapers. I did not return to Idaho. My resignation letter was already submitted to the financial data firm in Boise, severing my ties to the sterile cubicle and the spreadsheets. I hired a specialized crew to pack my modest apartment and transport my remaining equipment east. I spent the next 3 weeks securing a permanent operational base. I purchased a sprawling industrial loft in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The space featured original brick walls, reinforced steel beams, and a wall of slanted skylights that flooded the oak floorboards with pure, unfiltered, natural light. I no longer required blackout curtains or a locked bedroom door. The ghost had evaporated. I existed in the open. As the winter settled over the city, the digital fallout commenced. The Vanguard Winter Gala generated widespread industry acclaim, solidifying my trajectory in the international market. Back in Boise, the shockwave decimated the Lopez household. My cellular phone became a repository for their panic. I watched the voicemail notifications stack up, day after day. Sylvia left dozens of frantic audio files. Her tone shifted erratically, alternating between weeping apologies, desperate pleas for a reconciliation, and angry demands for an explanation. She told me how proud she was, trying to rewrite the narrative, pretending her cruel intervention was a misunderstood catalyst for my success. Elena sent lengthy, convoluted emails attempting to justify her behavior, citing the pressures of her job and the stress of her upcoming marriage. I listened to a few of the early recordings, studying the cadence of their desperation. I did not hear genuine remorse. I heard the frantic scrambling of social climbers who realized they had alienated the most valuable asset they ever possessed. They did not miss their daughter or their sister. They missed the proximity to power. They craved access to the high society they tasted for one brief evening. I did not return a single call. I did not draft a single reply. I deleted the audio files, emptying the digital trash bin with a single tap of my finger. The final interaction arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning in December. I was sitting at my long wooden work table organizing a new shipment of premium Badger hair brushes. The screen of my phone illuminated, displaying a brief incoming text message. It originated from my father. David had remained relatively silent during the initial barrage, leaving the emotional manipulation to his wife. His message contained 2 sentences. "We just wanted you to be safe. Please call us." I stared at the glowing letters. It was the ultimate distillation of his specific brand of cowardice. He attempted to reframe a decade of psychological suppression odometer tracking and verbal diminishing as an act of paternal protection. He wanted to maintain the illusion that he acted out of care rather than a desperate need for control. He required absolution. I did not type a response. I did not feel the familiar tightening in my chest or the urge to defend my trajectory. The anger that fueled the dark ridges of my masterpiece had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, sterile void. I tapped the contact profile. I selected the prompt to block the number. Then I navigated to the system settings and deleted the contact entirely. I powered down the device, silencing the final echo of my past. I stood up and walked toward the center of the loft. A pristine, oversized linen canvas rested on a heavy wooden easel. The fabric was taut, clean, and devoid of any history. The air smelled of fresh coffee and rain. Outside the tall windows, the vast, sprawling skyline of New York stretched across the horizon, an endless grid of concrete and ambition. I was 26 years old. the dual existence was terminated. The gray ashes of my 16th birthday were permanently sealed beneath the varnish of a museum exhibit. The family that demanded my mediocrity was stranded in a prison of their own design 1,000 miles away. I stood before the empty canvas, possessing no blueprints, no restrictions, and no hidden aliases. I picked up a clean brush. The studio was dead quiet. I was entirely alone, and for the first time in my life, I was truly free. I touched the bristle to the linen and made the first stroke. The light had finally turned on. There is a profound difference between guiding a child and breaking them. In the quiet, lingering aftermath of the Vanguard Gallery, when the flashbulbs have faded and the champagne has dried on the marble floor, the most haunting element of my story isn't the revenge. It is the tragedy of the fire pit. My parents, David and Sylvia, did not view themselves as villains. When my father sent that final, desperate text message claiming they only wanted me to be safe, a part of him likely believed it. But that is the most insidious danger inherent in traditional American parenting. The moment we confuse love with control and safety with submission. To raise a child in this culture is to navigate a relentless current of external expectations. Society demands measurable metrics of success: a stable salary, a recognizable job title, a silver SUV in the driveway. For my parents, these metrics were not just goals, they were armor. They believed that by forcing me into a cubicle and demanding I abandon my art, they were shielding me from the unpredictable wilderness of a creative life. But true family responsibility does not mean amputating a child's identity to fit them into a pre-purchased, socially acceptable mold. When you burn a teenager's portfolio to save them, you are not protecting the child. You are protecting your own anxiety. You are prioritizing the comfort of the country club over the heartbeat of your own daughter. Honesty in parenting requires a terrifying level of emotional awareness. It demands that a mother and father look at the child standing in front of them, not the idealized, corporate-ready version they sketched out in their minds, but the actual, breathing human being. Sylvia lacked this awareness entirely. She looked at my canvases and saw only a threat to her social standing. She weaponized the concept of an intervention, hijacking the language of care to perform an act of profound cruelty. When parents lie to themselves, framing their embarrassment as maternal concern, they build a foundation of resentment that no amount of forced Sunday dinners can repair. They teach the child that love is conditional, dispensed only when the child shrinks themselves to fit the parents' fragile egos. This dynamic is further poisoned when fairness is stripped from the household architecture. The creation of the golden child and the scapegoat is a tragic hallmark of families overly concerned with optics. Elena was handed the crown not because she possessed a superior moral compass, but because she adopted the rigid, colorless ledger my parents worshipped. They rewarded her compliance with blind adoration, creating a feedback loop of unearned arrogance. But this lack of fairness ultimately betrayed Elena, too. By shielding her from accountability and praising her every mundane achievement, they left her entirely unequipped for the real world. When the velvet drape fell in Manhattan, Elena was not a powerful banking executive. She was a terrified woman wearing a stolen pearl necklace, realizing that the sister she had stepped on for a decade was the only one holding up the floor. If there is a lesson etched into the ash-infused paint of the fire pit, it is that children are not extensions of their parents' unfulfilled ambitions. They are not second chances at high society, and they are not props to be arranged in a family photograph. Long-term guidance requires a parent to act as a gardener, not a sculptor. You do not carve away the pieces of the child you find distasteful. You cultivate the soil so their unique spark can take root. Had my parents possessed the emotional maturity to say, "We do not understand your art, but we see that it brings you to life," the entire trajectory of our family would have shifted. I would have painted my masterpiece in the sunlight rather than engineering an empire in the shadows. Instead, they chose the illusion of superiority. They chose to manage me rather than know me. And in American culture, where we are so frequently defined by what we earn and what we own, it is terrifyingly easy for parents to lose the plot. We trade genuine connection for the approval of the neighbors. We force our children to wear itchy, oversized clearance sweaters to hide their brilliance, simply because their brilliance makes us feel small. We track their odometer miles to ensure they aren't outgrowing the cage we built for them. But the human spirit, especially when pushed into a corner, does not simply vanish. It adapts. It learns to operate in the dark. It turns the ashes of rejection into the very medium of its triumph. The tragedy of the Lopez family is that they could have had a seat at the table. They could have stood beside me on that stage, sharing in the warmth of the lights. But they chose the fire pit. And when you choose the fire pit, you eventually have to live with the smoke. If my journey resonated with you, if you have ever felt the stinging heat of a family that demanded your silence to preserve their comfort, I invite you to join our community. Hit the subscribe button and follow the Elena Vengeance channel. We are building a space for the quiet architects, the scapegoats who refused to break, and the daughters who learned how to turn the things meant to destroy them into undeniable masterpieces. Stick around because there are so many more stories to tell and so many more truths to uncover. I often stand in my Brooklyn loft watching the morning light crawl across the exposed brick walls and think about that final text message from my father. We just wanted you to be safe. Sometimes I wonder if the real tragedy is that they will never understand the difference between building a sanctuary and building a cage. They will spend the rest of their lives looking at the blank walls of their Boise home, wondering why the house feels so incredibly cold. But the truth about fires is simple, and it is a truth every parent must eventually face. You can use the flame to keep your children warm, or you can use it to burn them to the ground. But you cannot control the wind, and eventually the embers always blow back.